Things just got really intense between the US and India on the trade front. Today, we're going to break down what happened, why it's happening, and what could come next. And it all kicks off with one single, very large number.
25%. That figure right there sent some serious shockwaves through the global markets and, diplomatic circles. So what on earth is it?
Well, that is the number for a brand new sweeping tariff that President Trump announced on pretty much all goods coming into the United States from India. We're talking about a move that's set to affect billions and billions of dollars in trade. All right, first, let's unpack this tariff shock itself, specifically how it was all announced and just how incredibly fast everything is moving.
What's really wild here is the speed of it all. The announcement drops on July 30th. The very next day, markets are scrambling. And then, bam, the tariffs are supposed to go into effect on August 1st. That's a ridiculously tight turnaround for two giant economies to try and absorb.
And, as if a 25% tariff wasn't a big enough deal, the announcement also came with a little something extra, an additional and so far totally unspecified penalty. This one is aimed directly at India for its ongoing economic relationship with Russia. So that just adds a whole new layer of geopolitical pressure to the mix.
Which, of course, brings us to the big question. Why? Why do this and why now? Well, the U.S. administration laid out two primary reasons for this really dramatic move. One is all about trade, and the other, well, it's about international politics. So this isn't a single-issue thing. President Trump framed it, first, as a reaction to what he called unfair trade practices, pointing his finger at India's own high tariffs. But at the same time, he explicitly connected it to India's dealings with Russia, specifically its ongoing purchases of Russian oil and military gear.
And this quote right here, from President Trump himself, it really gets to the heart of that trade argument. When he calls India's system one of the highest tariff regimes in the world, the White House is essentially framing this whole thing as a way to, level the playing field.
Okay, so with an announcement that big, what was the immediate fallout back in India? How did the stock market and some of the key industries actually react to the news?
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Everyone expected the Indian stock market to take a hit, right? And it did, at first. But then it actually bounced back into positive territory. It seems like investors pretty quickly decided this wasn't the final word, but maybe just an aggressive opening bid in a negotiation. A surprising show of resilience, for sure.
But look, don't let that market bounce fool you. There's real risk here. And this list is no joke. We're talking about textiles, chemicals, auto parts, pharmaceuticals, IT. These sectors are basically the backbone of India's export economy, and they are all absolutely bracing for impact.
But then, in the middle of all this worry, there's this number, $25 billion. And this figure, well, it represents a potentially massive silver lining. And here's why that number is so important. There are whispers that two absolutely huge sectors, smartphones and pharmaceuticals, which together are worth over $25 billion in U.S. imports, they might actually get exempted from the tariff. Now, if that happens, it would be enormous relief for the Indian economy, at least in the short term.
A shock like this also forces people to rethink their whole strategy. We're seeing prominent business leaders in India starting to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be so dependent on the U.S. market. They're pushing for a pivot to build stronger trade relationships with places like the European Union and the ASEAN countries in Southeast Asia.
So, despite all the really tough talk and the high stakes, the door isn't completely shut. Actually, all the signs are pointing towards negotiations. So what does that path forward toward a possible deal actually look like?
It looks like there's a pretty clear three-step process taking shape. First up, India's Commerce Ministry is doing its homework, figuring out the full potential damage. Then, step two, a U.S. trade delegation is expected to visit India around August 25th. And that visit should kick off step three, the start of real, formal talks on a whole new trade deal.
So, what would a final deal even look like? Well, a lot of analysts are forecasting some kind of compromise, an agreement that probably includes lower tariffs from both countries, but also has some special protections or carve-outs for really sensitive sectors in India, like agriculture and dairy.
All right, so let's just do a real quick recap of where we stand. You've got this sudden 25% tariff, you've got the extra penalty related to Russia, and you've got all these key Indian industries feeling the pressure. But there's a glimmer of hope with possible exemptions for smartphones and pharma, and the big next step is that U.S. trade visit to get the talk started.
And that really leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Is this the first shot in a really damaging trade war between two global partners, or is it all just some very aggressive political theater designed to force everyone to the table for a brand new deal? For now, that pendulum is swinging, and the whole world is watching to see which way it's going to go.